She thought my old eyes were too weak to notice her, the way her fingers skimmed the surface of my dresser as if the jewelry belonged to the dust, the quiet rustle in the hallway like a cat padding away with a prize. She thought the softness in my voice meant softness in my mind. She thinks a lot of things about older women, and most of them are wrong. If I had to pick one truth to carry into this whole mess, it's that time teaches you how to watch. Time teaches you how to catalog. Time teaches you how to wait. I remember the afternoon it started like a smell you can't forget. The smell of cheap perfume she wore, lilies from someone else's sympathy bouquet, and the hot iron tang of money being moved. I was sitting by the window, where the light sliced the room into a strip of gold and a strip of shadow, and I watched her bend just for a second toward my jewelry box. Her hand was fast, practiced. She slapped the lid back down like a joke. She laughed, that thin, rehearsed laugh caretakers use when they want you to believe they're harmless, and I felt something in my chest go cold but steady. Not fear, recognition. "What are you laughing at, dear?" I asked, and she turned so quickly her smile quivered. "Oh, nothing, Mrs. Hale, just the television." She held her hand over her mouth to seem coy. Her name was Jenna. Younger than my daughter, younger than my temper, but old enough to know what she wanted. That was the first strike. The second came in whispers that met me like stray cats in the hallway, little conversations that stopped when I turned my head. Visitors who came one week and didn't come the next, small things misplaced, my favorite scarf tangled in someone else's bag. The third strike was the way my daughter started to be too busy, and the way the woman in charge at the home smiled with a sympathy that tasted like paper. You want to know what it's like to be betrayed by someone you trusted? It is the slow unwinding of the self. You wake up and your hands feel foreign in your pockets. You find your savings gone a little at a time. You find your name in records you've never seen. You see your face in the mirror and have to explain to yourself where the person you knew has slipped away to. My daughter called less. When she did call, she sounded hurried, and the conversation felt like taxes, necessary, dry, and full of avoidance. She had a life, with a husband, a home, grandchildren. She had a schedule that didn't fit an old woman's need for Tuesdays. And so the house kept changing hands in little dishonest transactions while I kept taking inventory. I could tell you that sorrow consumed me, but that's not accurate enough. Sorrow was there, like a ghost at a table, but beneath it was a ledger of outrage. Every stolen earring, every whispered lie, every time someone told me I was imagining things and I wasn't. There was anger, yes, the kind that presses the teeth together and channels itself into a kind of clarity. That clarity is what turned my sorrow into planning. I wasn't a woman who had never been wronged before. I'd lived through husbands who promised security and left cracks, through friends who smiled while they picked at scraps, through bad investments and better lies. What all that living taught me was how to count. When one thing disappeared, I counted. When a series of small things shadowed one another, I mapped them. People will think you forget. I learned not to let them. The first tactical move was petty, and I own that. I began small, not because I didn't have it in me, but because arrogance is loud, and I needed silence. I started to leave notes, tiny, almost invisible at first, in places the caretaker would find them, not accusing, not threats, observations. Tia, too, tasted odd. The left earring is missing. You smiled just before the rain. She would find them and frown, then fold them into her pocket. Those little pocketed notes became her small irritants, her tiny reminders that someone was paying attention. Why not confront her then? Because confrontations are a beggar's business. You expose your wounds and the other person sees the feast. I wanted her to feel the hunger without knowing why. So I watched. And I kept watching in a way I hadn't at first. Watching became an art. I learned her route through the home, the way she chatted with nurses, the shift changes, the sloppy bookkeeping on certain nights. I started to show a little more, too, a quiet, careful presence in the lounge, a hum in the dining room that was not quite silence. I made myself visible, but not visible enough for guilt to tell tales. I learned to be the background in a room, while the foreground did the dirty work. You'd be surprised what people reveal when they think no one is looking. She left a receipt once on a cafeteria table. Wrong item, wrong name pulled from the menu. When I asked the woman beside me about it, she shrugged and said, "Oh, Jenna's always ordering an extra." The woman didn't mean harm. She meant community. But I began to take the inventory more seriously. I started to write the times down, the day, the exact words. My ledger filled itself with a quiet industriousness I had not felt in years. Having proof is the currency of the patient, and so I collected. Not photos, not the kinds of things that would require a phone at the ready and the risk of exposure. Now, I collected patterns. I collected names. I started to arrange small traps that were as moral as they were clever. A mismatched pair of earrings left purposely where hands could find them. A note that said, "I left my locket in the drawer," knowing all the while that she could not help herself. When she took what was offered as temptation, she took her bravado and proved it to me. There were nights I lay awake and rehearsed the way I would tell my daughter. I rehearsed the scene where I would stand and say, "You have been stealing from your mother." I imagined her face, imagined the husband's hands in his pockets, imagined the embarrassment. But revenge is not about spectacle. Revenge is about rectifying a ledger in which every loss is accounted for. It's about making sure the truth has weight. So I avoided spectacle. I built a case the way people build nests, with patience and a knowledge of where the current runs. One memory stands out like a photograph with its edges burned. It was winter, and there was snow that made the whole world soft and dishonest. Jenna came in, cheeks bright with contrived concern, and she told me a story about how her sister had bills, about how they needed help. She spoke as if her voice was charity in itself. I watched her eyes flick to the locket on my chest, to the gold watch that had stopped the day my husband died, but that my daughter liked to wind. She spoke. And while she spoke, I felt a different kind of hunger swell inside me, not for the objects, but for the moment when she would notice the weight of what she had done. I started to reach out subtly to others, not accusations, but invitations. I invited the head nurse for tea. I joked with the receptionist. I learned to make myself a magnet of casual witnesses. People prefer to be around those who are not inconvenient. I made myself inconvenient in a gentle way, a persistent presence that would not be dismissed as lonely rambling. I told stories, small ones, about the silver that had been in my family for generations, about my husband's watch. I let the stories to settle with listeners, little seeds of curiosity that would sprout when someone else's memory had been nudged. The most dangerous part of any slow-burning plan is the human heart. At some point, your anger can eat you. There were afternoons when I could have screamed at my daughters, at the management, at the whole softened world, and then I would remember why I had to hold my tongue. For every moment of fury, I set a counterweight of shame. I thought about the life I wanted left, the dignity I wanted intact. Revenge that ruins you in the process is not revenge, it's surrender. I wanted not just to punish, but to close the book. Then, one afternoon in spring, when the light came through the window and painted the hallway in gold again, Jenna made a mistake. She left my favorite bracelet beside the sink as if it had been misplaced. Only it hadn't been misplaced. She had been testing me. She watched me pick it up, watched my face, and smiled with that practiced innocence. But in her smile, there was a crack she didn't know about, the sort of crack you get when something is a little too rehearsed. That's where close calls begin. I needed to turn that slip into an opening without showing all my cards. I started to feed my ledger into the right hands. Not the police, yet. Not the kind of dramatic call that makes headlines and then gets buried. I fed it to a woman with a steady heart, a sister to the older residents, someone who had been in the field longer than any of us had patience. "I've noticed things," I told her quietly, and she nodded, as if she had been waiting to be told. She started to watch with me. Together, we did something I had not allowed myself to imagine for too long. We gathered objective traces, not the sensational kind that ruin lives on the internet, but real, quiet facts recorded in the way of nurses' notes, timestamps, signed receipts, quiet testimonies. I photocopied lists, kept tabs on withdrawal slips, wrote down the permutations of visits. It was no small feat. It required learning systems that were designed to prevent chaos, but could be used against the dishonest. I felt useful, and with that useful feeling came a strange new joy. Obstacles came in the shape of human error and human cruelty. There was a night my ledger went missing, the notebook where I had kept careful hours and names. For a day I felt naked. The world seemed very loud, and I feared that the people I had trusted would fold under the pressure. But the notebook turned up in the laundry room, damp but intact, shuffled under a pile of towels. Whoever had taken it had been sloppy or careless or just plain bold. That boldness showed me her level of desperation. I also learned something in that small disaster. People are sloppy when they think they've already won. There was another scare, a whisper that I might be moved to another facility, put under some sort of restriction because memory issues made me a liability to myself and others. The idea that they could render my voice into something that couldn't be believed enraged me more than anything. Proof, again, became everything. We redoubled our efforts. My confederate and I obtained signed statements from witnesses. We cross-checked receipts, and we kept our mouths closed when gossip started to simmer in the corners of the staff room. I learned the politics of small institutions, who leverages paperwork like swords, who deflects complaints, and who hides behind bureaucracy. And all the while, Jenna continued her dance, bold at times, careful the rest. She would sit across from me and pretend to help, smoothing my hair as if she had a right to my head. In those moments, I memorized the lines on her hands, the slight discoloration on one knuckle, the way she held herself when she was about to lie. These details matter because betrayal is not abstract. It has a face, and that face can be cataloged like a map. The breaking point came not with a shout, but with silence. One morning, I discovered there was a small envelope tucked into my bedside table. Inside was a photograph of my husband.
The two of us at a lake long ago, smiling in a way that made my chest ache. Someone had taken it from the frame and left it as a message. It was not so much a threat as an announcement. Someone knew what mattered to me and would take it if they wanted to. When I showed the photograph to my daughter, because in the end there's a place for family in these equations, she blinked and then blamed stress and said she would handle it. She didn't handle anything. Handling, it turns out, is delegating the guilt. That day, I decided the ledger would speak. We set the plan into motion, not a plan to ruin, but a plan to expose. We arranged for the management manager to receive a careful, documented packet. We included the receipts, the signed statements, the list of discrepancies, and a gentle, pointed cover letter from me. It read not as outrage, but as a meticulous archive. When I signed it, I felt the weight of all the years anchor itself in the ink. There is something powerful about writing your name beneath wrongdoing. It is a claim, and it does not smell of vengeance. It smells of insisting on truth. If there's a lesson I can give anyone listening, it's that justice is often procedural. Your righteousness matters, but the system responds to evidence. We had both. The manager received the packet, and for a breath, there was nothing but the sound of chairs as concerned staff discussed among themselves. Then there was action of the bureaucratic kind. Interviews, reconciliations, the quiet arrival of someone from corporate. They ask questions in polite ways, and polite questions can be lethal when they find soft spots. Jenna, of course, knew she was in trouble before the meeting. Her face was thin, the color flushed from anxiety. But even more revealing was how quickly she started to perform contrition. She said the usual lines, "I'm sorry, Miss Hale, I didn't mean," then her voice melted into something that sounded rehearsed. The staff watched. My daughter, who had ignored my calls for weeks, showed up like a rain cloud at the meeting and then dissolved into apologies that had no weight. I watched them all, and I kept the ledger close like a talisman.
There are moments in these things when the human animal shows its most honest side. During the meeting, Jenna's hands shook when she poured water. A nurse whose name I had used in a casual tea conversation earlier stood and described the missing items, the odd withdrawals. The corporate representative looked at the paperwork and then at Jenna, and in that fishing expedition of eyes, the net dropped. I didn't shout or wave the photographs. I let the facts do the work. Facts are unsentimental, and that's their beauty. The fall was not spectacular in the way movies like to show it. There were no dramatic arrests, no headlines, and no revenge montage. There was, instead, a cascade of smaller collapses. Her hours were reduced. She was transferred. She was given a choice to resign. A meeting with my daughter led to restitution of some small things. The manager apologized on behalf of the institution. She was not jailed, and I take no glee in that absence. But there was accountability, which is rare enough and precious enough that I could taste it. What surprised me was how hollow victory actually felt. When she was gone, when the things I had missed were returned or replaced, and when the ledger lay balanced, the house remained quiet in a way that made my bones ache. I had imagined a trumpet and the cheers of a crowd. Reality offered instead a slow, almost boring justice, the sort that is good because it lets you breathe again, not because it satisfies a primal hunger. I learned then that revenge is not about the cathartic moment of watching someone suffer. It is about the reclamation of your life. People ask, was it worth it? And I want to answer them honestly. There are nights when I replay every moment and imagine 1,000 variations,
harsher confrontations, grander exposures, a public shaming that would have satisfied younger versions of me. But there is a dignity in the quiet way justice sometimes arrives. I did not vindicate myself for spectacle. I vindicated myself for peace. The bracelet sits in my drawer again, a little lighter at the clasp from being handled. The locket is back on its chain. My daughter calls more, not because guilt has mended her, but because human beings have short memories and long habits. Sometimes inconvenience is the only thing that reteaches us to care. I will tell you the real twist, the one that surprised me most. The revenge changed me in ways I hadn't expected. It brought back into my life a sense of agency that I thought belonged to other, younger selves. It made me a participant instead of an object. That power is intoxicating in small measures. It is stabilizing in larger ones. I found myself planting small acts of kindness, the way a farmer plants seeds, with attention rather than abandonment. I learned to say no more easily. I am not a vindictive woman now. I am a woman who knows the weight of being watched and who no longer wants to be invisible. You might be thinking, would I have done the same? So let me ask you plainly, what would you have done in my shoes? Be honest. Would you have waited, counting and collecting, or would you have demanded instant justice and shouted it from the rooftops? There is no single right answer. People live by the choices they make. And sometimes patience is the smarter tool than fury. Sometimes fury burns the wrong things. I do not want to romanticize my actions. There is an ethical grayness to waiting while someone continues to do harm. We allowed her to do more because we were biding our time. I think about the line between justice and vengeance a lot. In the end, I tried to stay on the side of repair. I wanted accountability so that others would not suffer the same soft theft, the kind that erodes dignity slowly, like acid on metal. After it was over, the home seemed quieter, in a cleaner way. The staff rotated differently. New faces were vetted with a little more scrutiny. My daughter came on Sundays, occasionally bringing her husband and grandchildren. I would watch them and feel a tenderness that could be sharp as a blade. When the grandchildren ran through the hallway, careless and loud, I felt that old surveillance instinct, but it was gentler now, like a grandmother's watchfulness instead of a sentinel stake. On my bedside table sits the notebook where I first started recording times. The handwriting is my map through the betrayal. I sometimes turn the pages and read those small, furious entries, and I am astonished at how steady my hand remained. Each notation is a proof of survival, a fossil of attention. I keep the notebook for myself, not to brandish it like a weapon, but so I remember that I can be exact and patient. There were quieter consequences, subtler changes too. The younger women who came after Jenna carried an odd respect at first. Not fear exactly, but an awareness that there were eyes in the house with memory, and those eyes could be very precise. People who work in caring jobs are mostly decent. There are always a few who are not, and sometimes it is the presence of witnesses that keeps the line straight. I think of that often. If my little ledger altered the equilibrium even a bit, then the work was not in vain. I hope when you listen to this, you wrestle with your own code. I hope you feel the tight coil of anger that comes when the people you trust take from you, and I hope you don't let that coil snap you into something you'll regret. There is a long, patient way to correct wrongs that does not require you to become the very thing you despise. But if you must fight, do it with your eyes open. Keep your facts close. Keep your dignity closer. If I were to give advice from my tired, watchful place, it would be this: document, ask for witnesses, and choose your exposures carefully, not because I want revenge for its own sake, but because truth needs tools. Don't let anyone make you feel small for insisting on it. And if you feel alone, find a steady person who will look at your ledger with you. There were moments, after the big things had settled, when I found myself laughing quietly at a memory, the absurdity of it all, how a woman half my age thought she could outpace a lifetime. I chuckled at her audacity and at mine. Humans are always trying to measure themselves against time, and time has a way of humbling the loud and elevating the quiet. So that is my story. The slow watch, the careful ledger, the patient exposure, and the quiet restitution. It is not a tale of theatrical revenge, but of meticulous rectification. It is about not being invisible, about crafting a life so full of presence that thieves can no longer pretend you are gone. Would you have waited? Would you have acted differently? Think about that. Tell me, what would you have done in my shoes? Be honest. Would you have waited this long for payback? Or would you have screamed it into the world the first time you noticed the missing earring? I waited, and in waiting, I learned how to see everything and how to be seen in return.